Hi, in this short tutorial we're going to talk about Sub-Saharan Africa. The African continent is pretty much split into two different regions, and that's largely due to the Sahara Desert, which serves as a large physical boundary between Northern Africa, which is more associated with the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a large area north-south. You can see a map of it right here. And we'll talk about some of the statistics related to it, but the Sahara Desert is located in the northern part of Africa. It's literally the size of the United States. So we have this very large desert that separates countries such as Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, which are more connected to the Middle East, with a lot of these, countries to the south, which are extremely unique and different in and of themselves. These are just some pictures here. This is Cape Town, South Africa, which is at the very bottom or the southernmost point of Africa around the Cape of Good Hope. This is, I think, Somalia, Mogadishu, satellite imagery from there. This is Monrovia, the capital of Liberia, and we'll refer to Liberia a little bit later. But when we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, it's culturally diverse. It's one of the fastest growing region. It's got about 856 million people in 48 countries and one territory. And in most of these countries, nearly 50% of the population is less than 15 years old. So we can get an idea as to what this looks like from an age-sex pyramid. Some of the environmental geography that we deal with is desertification, the expansion of desert-like conditions as a result of human-induced degradation. We talked a little bit about climate change, but we have these areas called the Sahel, which is the zone of ecological transition between the Sahara to the north and the wetter savannas and forests to the south. And some of these zones of transition are turning into desert areas, largely due to some of the man-made issues. A lot of times, especially when we look at Southwest Africa and Central Asia, a lot of these issues are we're taking water from particular places and it's not getting downstream to where it needs to be or wants to be. So life is dependent upon the reliability of rains. And these are just some of the physical geography that we deal with. We have a lot of oil reserves right here. This is the Gulf of Guinea right here. Nigeria, Gabon, Cameroon are large oil producers in this particular region right here. We have Lake Victoria, okay? And you can see we have a plate actually right here. And this is what we call the Great African Rift Valley here. Okay, this is what we call a spreading center or a divergent plate boundary, where plates are literally spreading apart. So areas of volcanism right here in East Central Africa and then running right through the middle of the Red Sea. This is Victoria Falls in the southern part of Africa. And then you can see the number of natural resources. You can see the exploitation of especially, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, when it comes to some of these precious metals. Other things. Deforestation that we talked about with the Amazon. And then wildlife conservation. The island of Madagascar has a lot of biodiversity, and that's for a number of reasons. And then you can see some of the areas prone to drought here. You can see this area called the Sahel right here. And then the endangered biodiversity here. This is Madagascar. Okay? And they're unlike the plant and animal life, the flora and fauna are unlike anything else because it's been separated for millions of years. So you can see these desert-like conditions, and as you can imagine, these desert-like conditions are really going to dictate how people live. This is the skeleton close in Namibia. This is Southwest Africa. And Namibia, we're looking at this region over here. It's got plateaus and basins. Okay. We've got high Africa, low Africa. We have the Great Escarpment. And that's a landform rimming much of southern Africa. And then, like I mentioned before, the Rift Valley. And then we've got a number of watersheds. The Congo, Nile, Niger, Zambezi. In terms of climate, it's warm pretty much year-round. Rainfall varies regionally, obviously in the desert. The definition of a desert is that it's a region that receives little precipitation. But we've got the Congo Basin running through Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Congo. It's the second largest expanse of tropical rainforest behind the Amazon. We've got savannas. And you can see these are largely latitudinal zones. Then we've got deserts over in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and a fairly new country called Eritrea, which was formed in the 90s. And you can see a lot of these climates. We've got our A's, which are tropical climates, and then in the Sahara right here, you can see a lot of our B's. Okay, and this is using the Köppen climate classification system. We don't have any D's whatsoever. Okay, a lot of Canada is in that D region there. You can see we have very little here. Okay, and we do have some highlands right here, okay, as part of this great African Rift Valley. And you can see the elevation. So you can see the Great African Rift Valley here. You can see a number of mountains here. And then, like I said before, this escarpment right here through southern Africa. This is the Kalahari Desert. This is another desert, and this is in Botswana. This is this country right here, a landlocked country just north of South Africa. Okay. And then you can see Victoria Falls, the picture we saw before on the Zambezi River. This is the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro. Okay, this is relatively close to the equator. And the effects of global climate change, we can see how much of this ice is actually melting on a yearly basis. Okay? So literally decreased, tens, of percent. You can see the effects of orographic precipitation, but we can look throughout history and we can definitely see some of the challenges that we're dealing with in this particular area here. This is very fragile. In terms of population, it's projected to increase by 50% by 2050. Population density similar to that of the U.S. We've got really different population trends. They've got a preference for larger families. So as you can imagine, some of the rate of natural increase that we have there, that's going to be stemmed by some issues of crude death rate and emigration. We have a big impact of HIV/AIDS. South Africa or Southern Africa is ground zero for the AIDS epidemic. Lots of cases, running close second. We've got some Southeast Asia and all the Caribbean. It's widely scattered. We have agriculture subsistence. Basically mean people trying to just get by. That's what subsistence refers to. So you can see population, and this is early 2000s, percentage of people aged 15 to 29 with HIV/AIDS, and how is that going to affect future generations and population growth. Okay, and like I said before, Southeast Asia, and we do have some in the Caribbean region here. Okay. We could look in Southern Africa right here, and this is, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe. We can look at population pyramids, or chimneys, or what we want to call them. And you can see in dark purple what it would look like with the AIDS epidemic, and then what it would look like without the AIDS epidemic. And hopefully we're finding a happy medium between these two. Urban life. Okay, we talked about the idea of urban primacy. Okay, Lagos, Nigeria is the largest city by far. I think I've referred to a previous lecture where Abuja is the capital of Nigeria in a more central location. And you can just see population migration, interregion, and then outside people going to Africa, United States, Europe, and then places within Africa also. We can look at a dot density map right here to see where population is. By far, Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa, but also other larger ones are Ethiopia, we've got Tanzania, South Africa. This is a picture from Lagos, Nairobi, Kenya, Senegal over on the eastern coast, or western coast. This is Timbuktu in Mali. Okay, all up here. Okay, literally in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Urban life, and this talks a little bit about urban life. Okay, South Africa is one of the most urbanized countries in the world, and talks about a little bit about apartheid. Okay, we're going to have a short assignment essay referring to apartheid, okay, and the effects of it even today, even though when I was growing up, they were just getting rid of it. We can look at the sprawling business districts here. Language patterns. Okay, there's large diversity of language and religion, some due to European settlement and Asian settlement, okay, Asian languages, others due to a lot of other things. Okay. So we can see some of the official languages here. So English for a number, Zimbabwe, okay, but Portuguese over here for Angola and Mozambique. Okay, so you can see some of the language families that we have here. Okay. This talks about religion. So we've got the spread of Islam, okay, especially down the Indian Ocean coast. But in northern Africa, that's going to be a lot more prevalent. But we have, colonization by the Dutch and the Portuguese, who bring their own religion, such as Calvinism or Roman Catholicism. And so you can see, the Muslim majority here. So you can see a lot of these, regions here which have, large Muslim minorities here. So you see about these interfaith regions such as Nigeria, Central African Republic, Sudan. There's a new country here formed in 2011 called South Sudan. In my original map, I do have it here. And the role of slavery, and we've alluded to this before in a previous talk. And then basically the whole idea of geopolitics, the indigenous kingdoms, and European encounters, starting in the 1800s. And then you can see some of the local, the previous empires and kingdoms of Africa, pre-European settlement or pre-European colonization. And we'll talk about that with the Berlin Conference. In 1884, basically, Sub-Saharan Africa was divvied up between, in a meeting of 13 different countries with very little regard for the boundaries that people created there to begin with. So we can see some of the issues that we have in, say, Yugoslavia. We're just putting different culture groups within the same geopolitical framework. So these are some of the countries we have. Rhodesia, southern Rhodesia, northern Rhodesia, that turned into Zambia and Zimbabwe. And you can see where they belong to. Okay, so Belgian Congo from Belgium, Angola and Mozambique from Portugal. And like I said before, these have very little regard for the groups of people that were living there beforehand. This talks about the establishment of South Africa that we alluded to before. And then this whole idea of decolonization and independence. The end of apartheid. So you can see places like Zimbabwe, 1980. Recently in the news, we have a guy named Robert Mugabe. He's been the president of Zimbabwe since 1980. He was recently ousted, I believe in the year 2017 or 2018. But all these countries are all relatively new, except for Liberia. You can see 1847. But a lot of these are relatively new here. So they're still going through a number of growing pains. So we can see the democratically elected governments in 1970 versus 2000. And hopefully that'll be changing in a positive trajectory. Because like I said before, you can see the ethnic group boundaries and the lines that basically European powers just drew over them with little regard for them. And so we have a number of refugees as a result of a lot of this geopolitical within a geopolitical context. And these are just some of the places referring to that. Rwanda in the 1990s. but a number of other places: Somalia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, used to be called the Ivory Coast. And then these are some of the geopolitical issues that we see in this region. Okay. A lot of kleptocracy, corruption that they deal with. These are some of the connectivity issues that we see. Okay, internet access or whatnot. It's a lot less. And then just really working to use their own resources. Okay, there's a lot of oil mineral producers. Okay, and then how do we transform this from primary and secondary industries to tertiary and quaternary industries? Okay, so there's a wealth of resources, but still, large schism between your rich and your poor. Okay? And we can definitely see some differences between the two, okay, within this region here. So South Africa, a lot better life expectancy, quality of life than your poorer states in the Horn of Africa, like Somalia, and Ethiopia. And then that's about it for Sub-Saharan Africa.